The Mini hovered on the brink of disaster for its first 2 years. It wasn't until the then jet set, and indeed royalty, were seen driving Minis that the general public were prepared to accept them. Before the days of parking meters, the London trendsetters saw them as the answer to their parking problems, and suddenly it became a prestige symbol to be seen in a Mini.
I think it proves Sir Alec Issigonis' genius that the Mini is now still almost unaltered, almost 5 million cars later, and still in production. I remember when he designed it originally, I was with him he was doing drawings on the back of envelopes in Klosters in Switzerland. And his drawings were not dissimilar to those of Leonardo's sketches. I think why it's such a great car was that it was produced by one man. That I don't think will ever happen again. I remember the first ones, if you remember, had slide windows here. And I had some wind-down windows put in and sent it back to Alec for something else. Came back with one wind-down window on my side, and he put back the slide windows on the passenger side. I was furious. I said, "Why, Alec?" And he said, "Very bad for the passenger's hair if it's a lady." And it was always for honesty. It was actually more room when you didn't have wind-down windows. I think that we were always trying out new bits and pieces, not gadgetry, not things that made it heavier, but maybe functioned a bit more sturdily. I mean, the early ones had that rather flimsy green indicator lamp, do you remember? And I then tried out a Citroen one that I think is now almost the same as the one that's in it now. I designed some headrests that we put in that never took off. I mean, I was only designing additions for me personally, some of which got picked up and some of which didn't. The early one had a rather long gear lever, and it was a bit flimsy too. Well, it wasn't until the Mini Cooper when I liked it and it was more directional. It was also a very long way to reach down to it, so I elongated that. I think mine was probably the first to have safety belts. Alec wasn't a great one. He found it very difficult. He said, you know the way he looks over the top of his glass and he says, you can't sell safety. Never.
Almost certainly the first Mini with a hatchback was owned by Peter Sellers, another of the trendsetters. As a self-confessed car nut, he had a number of Minis, each one of which was customized for him. He began the fashion for mock wickerwork side panels, too.
Well, I had some of the first Minis. I think probably among the first few that came out. And I thought they were a great, great car, which they still are. I mean, they left everything as far as handling, and I mean, I forget what the first one I bought cost now. It was a ridiculous price. I think about 400 quid or something like that.
First of all, we really never made enough money with the Mini. The profit on it was very marginal. And in those days, oil and petrol was relatively cheap. And the Mini had a sort of fun appeal. It was socially acceptable. It had a snob value. But the tendency always was to go up into bigger cars, and it was a tendency which we rather encouraged, because the bigger the car, the more profit you make on it. Because irrespective whether it's a Mini or whether it's a Rolls-Royce, it's got roughly the same number of parts in it as you can visualize, and therefore the more you can charge a customer legitimately for it, the more the actual profit you can make.
Within a year of its introduction, the potential of the Mini had been seen by just a few in motorsport. Tuners were raising the top speed by 20 miles an hour, and without too much effort, the time taken to accelerate to 70 miles an hour had been cut by half. One of the first to think about the Mini for racing was John Cooper.
Originally, the Mini was right from the start, basically, and as soon as the Mini was announced, all the racing boys had one in the paddock. It was their wheels, it was their spare car, because it handled so well. And I went to see Sir George Harriman and with Sir Alec, and suggested that they made a special one for the boys. I had in mind racing the car because I thought if it was tuned up, it would be much better. And Harriman said, take one away and do something with it, Well, I knew Lockheed's very well, Jack Emmott of Lockheed's, and I got disc brakes put on it very quickly because they were They were experimenting with disc brakes in a mini wheel as an engineering exercise, and we put twin carbs on it and tuned it up a bit. And in a fortnight, I returned with the car to Harriman, and he drove it. In fact, I never got it back from him. And he said, right, we'll make it. So he said, how many shall we make? So I said, 1,000. I wanted to make 1,000 so we could get it homologated for competitions. And he said, 1,000, you'll never sell 1,000. I said, well, I'll buy 1,000 anyway. He gave me permission to make 1,000, and in fact, eventually there was 150,000 made in all of the S's and the various forms. But that's basically how it started. But I suppose the most disappointing thing for me, as far as the Mini Cooper was concerned, was when Sir George Harriman retired and what's his name? Stokes took over.
Well, we didn't really kill it, because we continued to make a 1190 or so cc version of the car, but there were technical and commercial considerations where we were paying out, for some reasons which seemed to me to be quite absurd, considerable sums in royalty for using somebody else's name, which were more than the profit we were making on the car, so there seemed very little point in going ahead with it.
When Sir Donald Stokes took over from Sir George Harriman, Stokes wasn't really interested in competitions, and I don't think he liked paying me £2 a car, and he thought there was a little trouble with the Cooper S getting insured because of its high performance. So he decided to replace it with the 1275 GT, but he should have called it the 1275 Executive or something, because they just treated it with the same insurance group as a Cooper S, and of course it wasn't anything like the same motor car.